Welcome back everyone for a very Miyagi Cobra Kai watch party. One of the best parts of Cobra Kai Season 3 was the trip to Okinawa and the peek into Mr. Miyagi's backstory. Indeed, in my wonderful video breaking down the top 10 lines of Season 3, I included the end part of this letter. It is rather touching. However, in that video I did note I had some issues with the sequence as a whole. Let's look at those issues and why this scene reveals a sad tragedy for Mr. Miyagi. The problem isn't what Kumiko reads from the letters. That's all touching and sweet. The problem is with what isn't said and really what it all implies. There's a lot of undertext here. Miyagi wrote a touching love note, but it has the feel of a couple who don't see each other. How many times did Mr. Miyagi and Yukie see each other after Karate Kid 2? Not much. After Season 1, there was a real impression Daniel had been back to Okinawa many times, presumably with Mr. Miyagi. I even thought maybe he brought his family before. Perhaps a young Sam had been to Okinawa as well. Season 3 makes clear that is not the case. Consider Daniel's drive from the airport. His complete bafflement at how much had changed really implies he hadn't been to Okinawa in at least 20 years, maybe more. You realize the implication is the same for Mr. Miyagi. One key line is here.
Your sensei's father taught my uncle. Sato taught me. Before he died, Sato gave me all Miyagi artifacts.
The first question is, how did Sato get them to begin with? When Mr. Miyagi's father died, he would have inherited his family's possessions. He was right there when it happened. It's not unreasonable to wonder if Daniel would have inherited them after Mr. Miyagi died, as he obviously inherited all his American possessions. But this is apparently not the case. Somehow all the Miyagi artifacts ended up with Sato and then Chosen. What's even crazier is Daniel knew nothing about it. Now we're not talking about super secret fighting techniques Miyagi never taught. No, we're talking about the basic stuff. The artifacts and relics of Miyagi-Do. Daniel didn't even know they existed. It never came up. Clearly if they had been back in the interim 30 years, he may have learned about it, but that didn't happen. It also didn't happen when they were there in 1985. Daniel of course knew Yukie was Mr. Miyagi's love from when he was young, and he reconnected with her when they visited. Except look at how surprised Daniel is that Mr. Miyagi wrote love letters. It's a deliberate plot point, and Kumiko almost teases him. It may seem cute, actually it is cute, but stop and think this through for a moment. The whole thing implies Daniel knew nothing of how Mr. Miyagi felt for Yukie. Certainly not in the way it's expressed in these letters.
I got to fall in love with you. Twice. In one lifetime.
What is sad here is Mr. Miyagi was saying all this in letters and apparently never got back on a plane to visit. Don't you think if Daniel had any inclination of this, he would have suggested Mr. Miyagi go back for a visit? He was retired, Mr. Miyagi's little tree's closed. Daniel was busy with a new car dealership and new baby. So why not? But that never happened. It's clear from the story neither of them had been back in decades. If Mr. Miyagi had gone by himself without Daniel, he probably would have mentioned that Mr. Sato was modernizing Tomi Village. But no, Daniel was taken by complete surprise. So Mr. Miyagi may have gotten to fall in love with Yukie twice in one lifetime, but it was mostly a long distance thing. They never actually saw each other, ever. After a few decades, it makes Miyagi and Yukie less star-crossed lovers and more pen pals. While Mr. Miyagi obviously stuck with his life in Los Angeles and what he had there, his disconnect from his Okinawa origins is tragic. Okinawa still could have been an important part of his life. He could have taken a trip back once a year or so, at least until his health went down. Many people who move away from home still visit back with at least a modest frequency. Mr. Miyagi did not. Season 3 makes that clear. There's another tragic part of Mr. Miyagi's story as revealed in his letters. Now Mr. Miyagi was a private man. Much of his personal life Daniel only learned in a sad drunken night. While he did open up more as time went on, it's reasonable to assume he may not have opened up to Daniel about everything. I say this because so much of what he writes in this letter.
In life, I have always looked for signs to show me the right way, but I got lost. Until I met Daniel-san. His kind heart, strong cheek, and loyalty and love for those around him is a guiding light to me.
This is nice to hear, but it brings a sad realization. Mr. Miyagi never said this to Daniel. Indeed, this whole scene revolves around the idea Daniel is hearing these thoughts and feelings from Mr. Miyagi as a sort of insight. The scene only makes sense when you realize now is the first time he's ever heard any of this. Maybe Mr. Miyagi was proud of him for the car dealership and the family, but it wasn't expressed in a meaningful way. Most importantly, Mr. Miyagi felt lost himself until he met Daniel, and it's very clear he never told him that while he was alive. If Mr. Miyagi had told Daniel before, or even a few times before, that he felt so lost until Daniel and his mom moved in, you know his reaction here would be different. He would be nodding or have some sort of recollection of the story. Instead, this is a Daniel who has never heard these words before. As you're watching now, you're a little skeptical. You never thought of it like that before, but surely that can't be the case. Consider how he talks about the family.
I never thought I would have a family again. Daniel-san has welcomed me into his family.
Daniel is somber. He looks up as it means so much to him. Then Mr. Miyagi brings up Sam. As he's talking about Daniel teaching her Miyagi-Do,
He has passed on what I teach him in Miyagi-Do
here's where Daniel nods.
to his daughter, to his daughter, to his daughter.
He remembers. He knows this part. As we later learn, Mr. Miyagi was there for balancing on the boat and other times. But now consider this part.
Samantha makes me feel like I'm her Tanme,
Tanme.
grandfather.
Now I think this is the saddest, most tragic part of the whole scene. Watch it again.
Samantha makes me feel like I'm her Tanme,
Tanme.
grandfather.
If Mr. Miyagi had ever referred to himself as Tanmei, wouldn't Daniel already know that word? It's clear he never heard it before. Now you may think they just called Mr. Miyagi grandfather in English, but I don't think so. Daniel would have asked, how do you say that in Okinawa? Amanda would have too. It's not like Daniel doesn't learn the right words.
The yanagi, or yanagi-ba, depending on the region, is a knife used exclusively for cutting sashimi.
So not only does Daniel know the proper name for his sashimi knife, but he knows the different pronunciations for different regions. But the word for grandfather, the one Mr. Miyagi uses, brings this.
Tanme.
Grandfather.
He doesn't know it and had never heard it before. You remember how Mr. Miyagi was a private guy for some things.
Hope confusion ends soon, Daniel-san. Miyagi heart empty without you.
You can see Mr. Miyagi may have felt like a grandfather and acted like a grandfather, but it's clear he never actually said it. He kept those thoughts to himself, and Daniel and Amanda didn't bring it up. Maybe they didn't want to bring up old wounds since Mr. Miyagi's son died. So maybe you like the idea of young Samantha sitting on Mr. Miyagi's lap and calling him Tanmei, but that's just not the case. Clearly she never did. I find it sad and the whole scene to be sort of tragic. Mr. Miyagi found his family with Daniel but could never tell him what it all meant to him, and none of them ever referred to him as Tanmei or any other word for grandfather. It's sad. It's worth pointing out the specific word Tanmei was actually chosen by Tamlin Tomita herself. Originally it was another Japanese word for grandpa. She thought Tanmei was more appropriate for Okinawa and what Mr. Miyagi would likely use.
I want to call out Tamlin Tomita because she was so great and so collaborative, and she had gotten the scripts and was like Tanmei. I think in her early draft I wrote Sofu, which is apparently not the right word, and she said no, it should be Tanmei.
So it's not just a matter that they used a less common word. Though while we're on it, the letters are written in Japanese and she's translating them. Why does she translate every word except Tanmei? Like, did you ever notice that or think about it? She translates everything but that word. I suppose part of the answer is to emphasize Daniel has no idea what the word is.
Tanmei.
Grandfather.
So while it's still a good scene, and I included it in my top 10 lines of season 3, there's definitely something tragic about the whole thing. Mr. Miyagi never expressed to Daniel all of what he meant for him. I guess when Father's Day is around, take an opportunity while you can. You just can't rely on private love letters being read years later. Leave a comment and let me know how you feel about this. Is it sort of sad that Mr. Miyagi could never express himself to Daniel in person and Daniel only learns all this via letters years later? Drop a like and subscribe. We're going to be back next time with some dating advice from Dimitri. You won't want to miss it. Have a great day. I'll see you at the next watch party.